In the heart of the peaceful English town of Belmar, where the postman still whistled tunes and children played by the riverside, lived a man named Thomas Whitmore. He wasn't tall, nor did he speak much, but he was always there, always working, always sewing. Thomas was the town's tailor for over 40 years. His shop sat like a warm old friend at the corner of Oak Ridge Lane. Its windows slightly fogged from the steam of his iron, and its doorbells jingling each time someone stepped inside. Everyone knew Thomas not because he talked a lot, or went to every event, but because he had a way of making people feel seen. When you walked into his shop, he would look up from his thread with a gentle smile and say, "Same fit as last time, Mrs. Jenkins." Or, "Ah, Henry, outgrew those school trousers, did you?" He remembered people, not just their names, but their sizes, their birthdays, their quiet sighs. He paid attention in a way most people didn't. The shop was simple wooden floors, an old cash register, a full-length mirror leaning against the wall, and rows of colorful threads hanging like little rainbows behind his desk. The smell of pressed fabric and tea lingered in the air. People came from all parts of Belmar, even nearby villages, to have Thomas stitch their clothes. His hands worked like magic. A worn-out coat would come out looking new. A bride's dress, made by Thomas, was known to bring good luck at least that's what the locals believed. His waiting area always had someone: an old man needing trousers patched, a young woman getting her graduation dress altered, a boy holding his father's waistcoat for fixing. Despite being a small shop, it was never empty. Belmar loved their tailor. Yet, despite the never-ending line of customers, Thomas's own life seemed untouched by wealth. His shoes were worn, his shirts faded, and his lunch often a simple sandwich wrapped in paper. He walked to work, always walked, even in the rain. The people of Belmar admired Thomas's work, but they often whispered, "He must be making a fortune, everyone goes to him," said Mrs. Holloway at the grocer's. "You'd think he'd buy himself a new coat by now," muttered the town's dentist, eyeing Thomas's frayed collar. Over time, a nickname started to float around, the penny pincher of Oak. Not out of cruelty, perhaps, but out of confusion. How could a man so talented, with so much business, live so plainly? And sometimes, their words weren't so soft. Once, a man named Peter Clark, a butcher from the other side of town, entered the shop for a suit fitting. As Thomas measured him, Peter chuckled. "Thomas, I bet you've got a mountain of gold hidden somewhere. You're not married, no children, and I've never seen you buy anything new. What are you saving for? Your coffin?" Thomas just smiled faintly and replied, "Some threads are best left hidden." Another time, a woman snapped at him while picking up her repaired blouse. "You know, if I had your income, I'd be out helping the homeless. You could do so much more. Why are you so tight with your coins, Thomas?" He only nodded, handed her the blouse, and said, "That'll be £5, miss." People didn't understand, and Thomas never explained. Sometimes, the most generous hearts wear the poorest shoes, and sometimes, the richest people never own a car, a mansion, or a title. They walk among us quietly, humbly leaving behind a trail of good, not gold. Thomas Whitmore wasn't rich, not in the way the world measured wealth, but every penny he earned, he used with purpose. He kept ledgers, yes, but not just for his tailoring business. In the back room of his shop, hidden behind rolls of unused linen, was a second notebook. Worn, brown, leathered, with pages filled not with bills or profits, but with names, names of families, dates, amounts, and beside each entry, a short line. Winter coats for the Turner boys, £42. Mrs. Reeves' gas bill, covered £63. H. Cartwright, tuition deposit, £350. It was a book of silent kindness. Each week, Thomas would take his modest earnings, calculate what he needed to keep his lights on, and then set aside the rest. But instead of tucking it away in a bank, he gave it away quietly, secretly, and no one ever knew. Most people in Belmar went to bed by 10. But Thomas's day didn't end with his last customer. At 11, he would close the shop, boil water for tea, and by midnight, he'd be out on the quiet streets of Belmar. Coat buttoned, boots laced, a satchel slung across his shoulder. Inside the bag, envelopes, brown, unmarked, each with just the right amount of money. No notes, no names. He'd walk silently down alleys, through gates, and along garden walls. A small hand reached out, placed the envelope on a windowsill, or gently slipped it through a cracked door. Then he vanished into the night, a ghost of generosity. He knew the families who were too proud to ask for help. He noticed when a widow's curtains stayed shut too long, or when a child's coat grew too short for the season. He kept track not to gossip, to give. Over time, people in Belmar started to notice odd things. A sack of potatoes left at the doorstep just as the pantry ran dry. An envelope with the exact amount needed to cover rent. A receipt tucked under a doormat showing the gas bill had been paid. Even children's school uniforms arriving days before the term began perfectly sized. No one knew who was behind it. There were theories. Maybe it's the church. Some new charity. Possibly Mr. Hawthorne. He does quite well in real estate. But none of them ever guessed the tailor. Why would they? He looked like he was barely getting by himself. There was never a signature. No return address. No trail to follow. Just the help they needed when they needed it most. One winter, young Emily Dawes, whose mother had just passed away, found a red wool coat folded neatly on their porch. Inside the pocket, gloves, a chocolate bar, and a small card that said only, "You are loved. Stay warm." She clutched that coat like it was a treasure. She never knew who sent it, but she never forgot it. And Thomas, he never told a soul. He would return to his shop, make a cup of tea, and watch the sunrise over Belmar as the town slowly woke warm, fed, clothed, and completely unaware of the man behind their miracles. True giving doesn't ask for credit. It doesn't wear a label. And sometimes, it walks quietly beside us in plain clothes, unnoticed, unthanked, but never unneeded. Thomas Whitmore lived in the same one-bedroom flat above his tailoring shop on Oak Ridge Lane for over 30 years. His bed was small, his meals simple, and his life quiet. But behind that simplicity was a secret. Every day, from morning to late evening, Thomas sewed trousers, stitched coats, repaired hems, and fitted dresses. His fingers never rested, and neither did his mind. Each pound he earned was carefully counted, not for savings, not for holidays, but for something far more meaningful. While most imagined he hoarded his money, stacking coins under his floorboards or in hidden jars, the truth was quite the opposite. Thomas gave it away, almost all of it. After paying for the shop's rent, fabric, and a little food, whatever remained went into a locked drawer. And every Sunday night, he opened a special black ledger book, worn at the corners, filled with tiny handwritten notes. Names, dates, needs. Baker family behind on rent, £150. Little Harry, no winter boots, £30. Reeves' widow, funeral costs, £200. There was no fanfare, no discussions. He saw a need, and he filled it. To the world, he was just old Tom, the tailor. But in truth, he was the beating heart of Belmar's compassion. By day, Thomas was a tailor. By night, he was an unseen guardian. Belmar was a small English town, peaceful, green, and close-knit. People knew their neighbors by name. The baker asked about your mother. The grocer remembered how many children you had. It was the sort of town where nothing stayed hidden for long. Or so they believed. Everyone in Belmar respected Thomas Whitmore's work. They said it plainly. Best stitches in the county. He saved my wedding suit. Not a thread out of place. That man's hands are blessed. But that praise came with puzzled looks and quiet judgment. Because despite his skill and success, Thomas lived so simply. His coat was always the same plain brown, patched at the elbows. His shoes, polished but old. His shop, clean but modest. And his home a small flat above the shop looked, barely lived in. They didn't understand it. And when people don't understand something, they often fill in the gaps with assumptions. One summer morning, a group of women were gathered outside the cafe next to Thomas's shop, sipping tea and watching him through the window. "He's always got customers," said Mrs. Wainwright, squinting. "Exactly," replied Mrs. Holloway. "He should be rich by now. Doesn't even own a car, for heaven's sake. Probably doesn't believe in spending," muttered another. "I mean, look at that coat. Same one for 20 years. Oh, he must be sitting on a pile of cash. Why else would he live like that?" Their voices were light, amused even, but their tone held something else. Suspicion. Mild resentment. The way small towns sometimes turn on someone who dares to be different. It wasn't just the women at the cafe. Even the men at the barber shop raised eyebrows. "I heard he lives off potatoes and toast," said one. "Man makes more in a week than I do in a month, and still wears hand-sewn socks," another joked. They all laughed, but no one stopped to ask why Thomas lived the way he did. The gossip grew. "Tailors must make good money," people said. "He has no family, no one to spend it on. Yet he won't even donate to the church fund." That one stung the most because the truth was, Thomas had given to the church. Many times. Quietly, in cash, slid into envelopes with no name. He had even paid for the new roof last winter, but the vicar never knew who had left the money on his desk with the words, "For the house of God, a friend." Still, the town had painted a picture of Thomas, a lonely man, sitting on a mountain of money, too selfish to share. And Thomas, he said nothing. He smiled gently when people teased him. He nodded politely when asked, "Saving up for a gold throne, are you?" But inside, he carried the weight of 1,000 secret acts of kindness that no one would ever know. One day, a man named James Sutton barged into Thomas's shop. James was known for his loud voice and quick temper. He slammed a jacket on the counter. "You overcharged me, Whitmore. £10 for this fix. What are you trying to do-rab the town?" Thomas didn't argue. He simply checked the invoice and said, softly, "The price is fair, James. But if you can't pay, take it. No charge." James stared at him, confused, unsure how to respond. He grabbed the jacket and stormed out. But the whispers grew louder after that. Some said Thomas was greedy. Some said he must be hiding something. One cruel rumor even claimed he had no customers at all, and was just pretending to be busy. In truth, Thomas was busy feeding families, sending anonymous payments, walking miles in the night to drop off help to the hopeless. But Belmar never knew. Not yet. They saw the worn coat, but never saw the warm heart. They counted his pennies, but never his prayers. They judged his silence, but never his service. Though Belmar whispered about Thomas Whitmore, questioning his quiet life and modest ways, there were those scattered across the town who lived because of his silence. They didn't know it was him, but when their darkest days crept in, help always came. Wrapped not in glory or grand gestures, but in plain white envelopes, with no name, no return address, no conditions. Just enough hope to last one more day. Margaret Davies lived in a crumbling red brick cottage on Westmere Street. The roof leaked when it rained. The floorboards groaned with every step. But she had shared that home with her husband, Henry, for over 40 years, and she had no intention of leaving. That winter was one of the coldest Belmar had seen in decades. The wind cut through the narrow streets like a blade. Snow piled on doorsteps. The nights felt endless. It was during one such bitter night that Henry collapsed heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance could even make it through the snow. And just like that, Margaret's world changed. No husband, no pension, just a widow, 73, with arthritis in both knees and barely enough money left to buy tea and bread. Her heating had already been shut off. She wrapped herself in blankets, sat beside a candle, and cried herself to sleep. By January, Margaret had sold her wedding ring to pay for pain medicine. She skipped meals, refused to tell her neighbors how bad it was. Pride is a strange thing. It keeps people quiet, even when they're hurting, Her joints ached, her fingers were swollen and stiff. Some nights, the cold was so sharp it felt like knives beneath her skin. She began coughing, first gently, then violently. Still, she whispered, "I'll manage. I always have." Then, one evening, as she returned from the corner shop, her paper bag filled only with crackers and a tin of beans, she found something odd. It was a plain white envelope, slipped under her door. No stamp, no handwriting on the front. Just her name, Margaret. Inside were 5 20-pound notes, no letter, no instructions, just warmth. Unexpected, unexplained warmth. She stood there, trembling, tears pooling in her tired eyes. "Who?" she whispered, but the street outside was silent. Only the snowflakes answered. That night, she lit the fire. The next morning, she went to the pharmacy. By the end of the week, her cough was easing, her fingers moved more freely. She never told a soul. Somehow, she felt it might make the magic disappear. And then, like clockwork on the first of every month, another envelope arrived. Sometimes it came under the door, sometimes in the letterbox. Once, it was left inside her coat pocket when she visited the grocer. It always had the same message. None. Just money. Just enough. Just in time. No one ever knocked. No one ever asked how she was. But somehow, someone always knew. She began to smile again. She even bought seeds in spring, planting daffodils in her front garden the first time in years. People passed by and said, "Mrs. Davies looks well, doesn't she?" But no one ever guessed who was helping her stay alive. She never saw him, never guessed it was the quiet man behind the needle. But every time she warmed her hands by the fire, it was his kindness burning there. Margaret wasn't the only one. In the alleys, in the schools, in quiet kitchens across Belmar, Thomas Whitmore's hand left no fingerprints, but his kindness left marks on hearts. His generosity was like the wind unseen, but always felt. On the eastern edge of Belmar, beyond the polished cafes and tidy gardens, stood a tired block of council flats, made from graying brick. Apartment 3B belonged to the Cartwright family. It was small, just 2 rooms, a worn sofa, a leaking tap that never stopped. Henry Cartwright, just 17 then, lived there with his father, a car mechanic with oil-stained hands and a heart of gold. Henry's mother had passed away when he was 8. Since then, it had just been the two of them. Alan worked long hours at Belmar's only garage. His knees hurt, and his back cracked every time he bent to fix an engine, but he never complained. Henry, on the other hand, was quiet, polite, and brilliant, top of every class. His teachers called him a once-in-a-decade student. He didn't go out much. He didn't buy fancy clothes. His shoes were scuffed, his uniforms second-hand, but his mind sharp as a blade. He had a dream: to study mathematics at King's College London. He never spoke it out loud, not even to his father, because dreams that big, in a flat that small, felt like a cruel joke. When the acceptance letter arrived, cream-colored, gold-stamped, Henry stared at it for hours. Then he hid it under his pillow. The tuition fees were impossible. Over £9,000 a year, not counting food, rent, travel. Alan looked at him one night and said, "Son, you can't carry the sky on your shoulders. Some things, they're just not meant for people like us." Henry nodded, but his heart ached. He started looking for part-time jobs, thought about night shifts, gave up hope, little by little, until one morning, on the windowsill of their flat, lay an envelope. It wasn't there the night before. No stamp, no address, just his name, Henry. Inside, a bank check. Not just for tuition, but for the full cost of his first year. Books, rent, food, travel. No name, no explanation. Just a small card with 4 words: "Don't stop dreaming, lad." Henry ran down the stairs, searched the street. No one. Just the usual birds, the bin man, and the milk van, ... He cried in the stairwell, clutching the envelope to his chest. That day, he told his dad, Alan sat in silence, eyes full of tears. Who would do this? Henry didn't know. But someone believed in him. If Faye in London was difficult, the city was loud, the halls were cold. Everyone else seemed to have money, laptops, the right clothes. Henry had grit and worn shoes, but he worked harder than anyone, studied late, ate little, and somehow survived. And just when it seemed he couldn't go on, when his rent was late, or he needed a textbook, he couldn't afford another envelope would appear. In the university postroom, in his dorm mailbox. Even tucked between pages of his library books. Never flashy, never excessive, just enough. Once, when he hadn't eaten in 2 days, he found 30 pounds, slipped beneath his dorm room door, with a tiny sticky note. Brains like yours deserve more than hunger. He never told anyone, not even his closest mates, because part of him felt it would scare the magic away. Some guardian angel was watching Henry, not with wings, but with a needle and thread. Back in Belmar, behind the shop window on Oak Ridge Lane, Thomas Whitmore stitched trousers by day, and stitched futures by night. Henry Cartwright graduated top of his class. He returned to Belmar, not as the boy from the council flats but as Dr. Henry Cartwright, lecturer in applied mathematics. He bought his father a small home with a garden. And every time he walked past the tailor's shop on Oak Ridge Lane, he paused. He'd never once bought a suit there, but something about the quiet man behind the counter, with his kind eyes and frayed cuffs, always made him nod. He didn't know. Not then. It was early spring in Belmar when Eleanor Birch, just 23, stood outside the council office, with her hands tucked beneath her coat, hiding the small swell of her belly. The sky was dull, a soft gray blanket over the rooftops, and a cold wind curled through the narrow lanes. Eleanor had lived a quiet life until now. She worked as a receptionist at the Belmar Medical Center, always on time, always kind. She lived in a small flat with her partner, Simon, whom she trusted deeply. Until one evening, when Simon didn't come home. Then the next day, then a text, "I can't do this. You'll be better off without me." That was all. Just like that, she was alone with a baby growing inside her, rent due in a week, and only 48 pounds in her bank account. She tried to smile through it, kept going to work, didn't tell anyone, but the shadows under her eyes grew darker. She walked through Belmar like a ghost, quiet, drifting, trying to figure out what to do next. And then something strange happened. It was a Thursday, when her landlady, Mrs. Winthrop, knocked at her door. Eleanor braced herself for the conversation. She had rehearsed it all night. "Please give me more time. I'll find extra work. I'll pay in 2 weeks." But Mrs. Winthrop just smiled. "No need, dear," she said. "Your rent's been paid. For the next 3 months." Eleanor froze. "What?" The landlady nodded. "An envelope arrived in the post this morning. No name. Just a note, for Miss Eleanor Birch, for the peace she deserves." Eleanor sat down on the nearest chair. Her hands trembled. She wanted to ask more, but there was no more to ask. That night, she cried into her pillow tears of confusion, relief, and a deep, aching gratitude. She didn't know who it was. She didn't even know how they knew she was struggling. But someone had seen her. Someone cared. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor noticed little changes. A food parcel outside her door, fruit, bread, milk, vitamins. Then, a soft blue blanket folded neatly with a tag, "For the little one." A week later, a small bundle of newborn clothes in a basket. Each time, she looked outside. No one. Just a quiet street. She tried asking around her midwife, neighbors, the postman, but no one knew anything. Then, one Saturday morning, she found a prom leaning gently against her doorframe. New, strong wheels, cozy padding. Tied to the handle was a note. "You are not alone. Keep going. You're already a wonderful mother." She pressed the paper to her lips, heart thudding in her chest. That day, she walked through Belmar differently. She held her head a little higher, smiled a little easier. Someone was helping her. someone who asked for nothing in return. She didn't need to know who. The kindness was enough. And while the townspeople of Belmar passed by the little shop on Oak Ridge Lane where old Thomas Whitmore stitched trousers and hemmed skirts, none of them guessed that his hands had touched their lives in gentler, deeper ways than fabric and thread. Behind the measuring tape was a man measuring something far greater, human sorrow, and the silent chance to soothe it. Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby girl that summer. She named her Hope. Every time she dressed her in the soft clothes from the mysterious basket, every time she tucked her in the gifted prom and walked through the park, Eleanor would whisper stories of someone she never met but who had changed her life. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask, "Mummy, who gave us all these things?" Eleanor would smile. "I never knew his name," she'd say, "but he had a heart bigger than Belmar." And the quieter corner of Belmar, near the overgrown hedgerows of Willow Crescent, Lived, Albert and Joan Hiller, couple married for 52 years, now both in their late 70s. Albert had once been a train conductor, broad-shouldered, quick to laugh, and always early to shift. Joan, once a school librarian, had a memory like a map, remembering every child who ever read under her watch. But now, age had dimmed their sparkle. Albert's back ached constantly from an old rail accident, and Joan's knees were stiff with arthritis. Their small flat was tidy but faded, like a well-loved book with a worn spine. Their world had grown small: the fireplace, the kettle, the radio, and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. They lived off their pension barely. After rent and utilities, they had just enough for essentials. But medication, that was a luxury. Between Albert's heart pills and Joan's arthritis treatments, they were forced to choose. And so, they skipped meals, Not every day, but enough. They'd pretend they were full, that they'd already eaten. They watered down soup to make it last. Bread without butter became dinner. But they never complained. Not once. Until one Saturday morning, everything changed. It began with a knock on the door. Albert, adjusting his wool cardigan, shuffled over and opened it. On the doorstep was a brown paper box, warm to the touch and neatly tied with twine. A note sat on top. For Mr. and Mrs. Hill, with kindness, from a friend. Inside, there was stirrup, thick, with soft vegetables and warm rolls on the side, a flask of tea, a tin of shortbread biscuits. Joan gasped. Albert blinked in disbelief. They hadn't told anyone about their situation. Not even their neighbor, Mrs. Farnsworth, who visited now and then with leftover pie. Joan placed the box on the kitchen table like it was a treasure chest. They didn't know who had sent it. They didn't care. For the first time in weeks, they ate until they were full, truly full, and for dessert, they laughed. The next month, on the first Saturday, it happened again. A different box, same note, from a friend. This time, roasted chicken, fresh greens, buttery mash, a sponge cake with jam. And the month after, shepherd's pie, crusty bread, tea cakes. And so, it went on, month after month, without fail. Always the first Saturday. Always anonymous. At first, Albert and Joan believed it must be a local charity. Maybe the church, or the Rotary Club. Joan called the parish. "Did you by any chance organize food parcels for pensioners?" "No," the secretary replied, "but what a wonderful idea." Albert asked the boys at the local corner shop if they knew anything. They didn't. Joan once tried waiting near the door, hoping to catch the delivery. But every time, the knock came and vanished quicker than she could hobble over. It was as if the box appeared out of thin air. Some weeks later, Joan spoke to Martha Ridley, a woman from across town who'd recently received groceries during a tough patch. "Strange," Martha said. "Mine just showed up one day too. No name, just kindness." They began to wonder, who was doing this? Was it one person? A group? A guardian angel of Belmar? Joan sometimes joked, maybe it's Santa Claus in disguise. Albert would chuckle and say, "Well, if he is, I hope he knows his Yorkshire pudding's better than yours." They never stopped wondering, never stopped feeling thankful. To the town of Belmar, Thomas Whitmore was just a tailor. A quiet man behind a curtain of needles and cloth. But to those he helped in secret, he was warmth in the cold, bread in the hunger, light in the loneliness. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that every Friday night, after he locked his shop on Oak Ridge Lane, Thomas Whitmore walked with a box under his arm. He prepared it quietly, warming the stew at the back of his flat, choosing the best rolls, folding the napkins with care. He would take the side lanes in shadowed streets to Willow Crescent. He never knocked loudly. Just a soft tap and gone. Sometimes, he stood behind a hedge to make sure they collected it. He'd smile when the door opened. He'd tip his cap and disappear. Not once did he want to be seen. Because for Thomas, giving was never about being thanked. It was about knowing someone, somewhere, would sleep with a full belly and a lighter heart. When Thomas passed, the boxers stopped. The first Saturday came and went. No knock, no warmth, just silence. Joan sat by the window all day, hopeful. Albert looked down the street, waiting. Nothing. A week later, news spread across Belmar. Thomas Whitmore, beloved tailor, kind soul, had died quietly in his sleep. The town wept, ... But it was only in the following days that the truth emerged, letter by letter, memory by memory, a trail of kindness, too long to be coincidence. Joan wept harder than she had in years. Albert raised a toast with shaking hands. To the kindest man I never knew. For nearly 8 years, the people of Belmar had grown accustomed to a strange and heartwarming mystery. On the first Sunday of every month, without fail, families across the town would find a large brown paper hamper on their doorstep. Wrapped neatly in twine, the contents were always the same: loaves of fresh bread, milk bottles, butter, cheese, fresh fruit, and often a few tins of soup or stew. Families struggling to make ends meet began to count on this blessing. No one ever knocked. No one ever saw who left them. They simply appeared like magic in the early morning hours. Mrs. Whitaker, a single mother of 4, once said, "It's as if someone's watching, quietly helping, without wanting anything in return." Little did they know, the quiet old man hunched behind a sewing table on Oak Ridge Lane was the one who orchestrated it all. Thomas Whitmore had made arrangements with 3 local grocers, Mr. Bernard at Belmar Market, Mrs. Shaw from Meadow Foods, and a small organic farm run by the Parkers. Each of them received a list from Thomas, handwritten and modest. Each list had names, addresses, and a short note. Family of 5, youngest child, sick, prioritize fresh fruit. Old man, lives alone. Diabetic include, sugar-free biscuits. He paid in cash. Always in cash. And always a little extra, for your trouble, he'd say. No one questioned him. They thought he was helping on behalf of a church, or maybe a charity. After all, he never asked for recognition. He simply showed up, quietly, and ensured everything was taken care of. "Keep it between us," he'd tell them with a soft smile. "Let's just help people." And so they did. For years, without fanfare or fuss, Belmar's hidden guardian kept bellies full and hearts a little lighter. One cold November morning, the bell above the tailor shop failed to ring. Oak Ridge Lane was quieter than usual. It wasn't until 2 days later that Mr. Whitmore's neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, noticed the lights had been off for too long. She knocked. No answer. She called the constable. They broke in and found him sitting peacefully in his favorite chair, a soft smile on his lips, a half-finished shirt on the sewing table, and a warm cup of tea now gone cold. Thomas Whitmore had passed away in his sleep. The entire town mourned. Though many didn't know him personally, they knew of him Old Tom, the quiet tailor who never made much of a fuss. But a week passed, and then another, and something else changed. There were no food hampers. Mothers waited by their doors. The elderly peered through their curtains. Children rushed out in the morning, excited to see if the mysterious brown bag had come, but it never did. Whispers began to spread across Belmar. Maybe the church has run out of donations. Did the food bank close down? Who was delivering all that, anyway? People began asking around. Mrs. Shaw at Meadow Foods stayed quiet. She had promised not to say a word. But then came the funeral, and everything changed. As the vicar stood before the modest coffin, speaking kind words of Thomas Whitmore, a few townsfolk stepped forward to share their stories, and one by one, a puzzle began to piece itself together. The morning of Thomas Whitmore's funeral was cold and gray. A quiet drizzle misted the town of Belmar, as if the skies themselves mourned the passing of a man they never fully understood. The tailor's shop on Oak Ridge Lane remained shuttered, its curtains drawn, the soft ticking of the wall clock now silenced forever. Word had spread slowly through the town. Not everyone had known him personally, but everyone had known of him. Old Tom, the tailor. The man with the crooked glasses, calloused fingers, and quiet smile. Some had called him frugal. Others had whispered he was miserly. But all agreed he was a master of his craft. No one, however, suspected that Thomas's final stitch would bind the entire town together. There was no grand ceremony. No family members traveled in from distant cities. Thomas had no children, no wife, no siblings. Only a modest wooden coffin, surrounded by a scattering of people who had once stepped into his shop for alterations, trousers, or mended buttons. There was old Mr. Hargrove from the hardware store, Miss Eliza from the post office, the Parker family from the farm customers, not kin. The vicar, Reverend Hall, stood at the front of the small cemetery chapel with a heavy heart. He had prepared the usual prayers for a humble, quiet man. But just moments before the service, he was handed an envelope found in Thomas's workshop. It was sealed with wax, simple and unassuming, written across the front. To be read when I am gone. Reverend Hall took a breath, broke the seal, and opened the letter. It was handwritten in the careful penmanship of a man who had spent a lifetime tracing chalk lines on cloth, and then he began to read aloud. To those who've come to say goodbye, thank you. If you're hearing this, then my time has ended, and I have left Belmar for good. I was never much of a talker, so I'll be brief. You may wonder why I never seemed to do more with my earnings. Why I dressed simply, or why I never bought myself a car or a bigger home. Some even called me stingy. That always made me smile. You see, I never kept the money. Every pound you paid for a coat, a shirt, a hem I passed it on. Not because I'm noble, not because I'm saintly, but because I knew what it felt like to go hungry. My father died when I was 12. My mother couldn't afford heating. I lost her that same winter. No child should go cold. No widow should choose between bread and medicine. No student should lose their dream for want of tuition. I wasn't a hero. I was a tailor. But I stitched what I could into this world, not clothes, but hope. If you ever received help without knowing the giver, if food appeared when your cupboards were bare, if kindness found you without a name attached, it was never a ghost, it was just me, old Tom. The chapel fell silent. Many people lowered their heads, others wiped their eyes, and one by one, the puzzle pieces began to fit Margaret, Henry, Eleanor, Albert, and Joan. Dozens of faces, all now realizing who had saved them. From that day on, the town of Belmar changed. Mr. Bernard from the market started a community food box in Thomas's honor. Mrs. Shaw offered free groceries every first Saturday to the elderly. The Parker family donated baby clothes to struggling mothers. Even those who once whispered behind Thomas's back now stood by his grave weekly, offering silent apologies. And on the window of the tailor shop, long closed but forever remembered, someone taped a small handwritten note. He wasn't rich in gold, but he was rich in kindness. And that's the only wealth that matters. After the funeral, Reverend Hall visited Thomas's tailor shop, now locked and dim, to gather his belongings for safekeeping. Behind the counter, beneath a neatly folded tweed jacket, he found a small, weathered leather-bound notebook. Its corners were softened by time, and the pages had yellowed. Curious and cautious, Reverend Hall opened it. Inside, in neat, careful handwriting, was the record of a life spent in service. Each page was dated. Every line held a name, a need, and a quiet act of giving. November 1996, Widow Davies, pneumonia. Delivered 40 pounds, via window slit, arranged for coal. March 2003, Eleanor Birch, pregnant. Flat rent paid for 3 months. Baby clothes ordered. September 2012, Henry Cartwright. Books for university term. Tuition fee covered anonymously. Monthly Albert and Joan Hill. Saturday stew delivery. Groceries prepaid with Bernard. No page boasted. No line asked for recognition. There were no receipts, no signatures, just truth and kindness. Reverend Hall gently closed the diary, placed his hand over the worn cover, and wept. This was no Tailor's ledger. This was a chronicle of a man who had sown compassion into the very seams of Belmar. Word spread quickly. As townsfolk visited the chapel to pay their respects, Reverend Hall began reading select pages from the diary. Names echoed through the pews, names that made eyes widen and hands tremble. Margaret Davies, now in her late 70s, sobbed openly when she realized it was Thomas who had kept her warm all those winters ago. Henry Cartwright, now a science teacher at Belmar High, sat silently on the steps outside the chapel, holding back tears, clutching a letter he once thought came from a charity. He had framed that letter once. Now he knew who had written it. Eleanor Birch, her son now 5, stood quietly near the tailor's shop and whispered, "Thank you," as if hoping Thomas's spirit could hear her. Even Albert and Joan Hill, old and slow in step, made their way to the little notice board outside the shop, where townsfolk had begun to leave flowers, notes, and scraps of fabric stitched with simple words. "You saved us. You gave quietly. We remember loudly. You stitched our lives together." The town of Belmar began calling him something new. Not old Tom. Not that stingy tailor. But the tailor who stitched lives. Children asked their parents, why didn't anyone know? Parents responded with tears, because he didn't want us to. That's what made it beautiful. Local newspapers printed his story. One headline read, "The richest poor man in Belmar." Another simply said, "He left with nothing, but gave us everything." A mural was painted on the brick wall behind his shop. It showed a man sitting at a sewing machine. Golden thread flowing from the needle into the shape of a heart, then a house, a bowl of soup, a pair of shoes, and finally people, all stitched together in one long line. There were many who now felt the burn of regret. Mr. Perry, the baker, who once laughed aloud, Tom's, saving for what? A golden needle. Mrs. Kendall, who said, he's a tight-fisted man, probably counting his coins by candlelight. Even young David Pierce, who once mocked Thomas for still riding a bicycle, now stood in front of the shuttered shop with red eyes and a trembling lip. They remembered their words. They remembered his silence. Not once had Thomas answered back. Not once had he defended himself. Not once did he correct them. He had simply smiled and continued sewing. Now, they wished they had known. The days after Thomas Whitmore's funeral were unlike anything the small town of Belmar had ever experienced. There was no festival, no parade, no public holiday. Yet the town stopped, quietly and completely. In homes, in shops, and even in the pub, people sat together not to gossip or complain, but to remember, and more importantly, to confess. Not crimes, but judgments. For years, they had seen Thomas walk through town, always wearing the same brown overcoat, always riding that squeaky old bicycle, always smiling quietly, but never joining in the jokes or chats, and so they had assumed, he must be tight with money. He's got no family, what's he saving it all for? But now they knew. It was a cloudy afternoon when the townspeople gathered around Thomas's old shop. A table had been set up outside, where people were leaving flowers, notes, and small candles. It wasn't planned. It just happened naturally. Mr. Bennett, the owner of the grocery shop, stood near the edge of the crowd. His voice cracked as he spoke aloud. All these years, I thought he was odd. Always paid in cash. Never spoke much. But every month, he ordered boxes of food and told me to deliver them to different houses. Quietly, I thought he was part of some charity group. He paused. His hands shook slightly. Turns out he was the charity. People gasped. A few covered their mouths in shock. Others looked at the houses mentioned in Thomas's diary: the widow on Westmere, the boy in the council flat, the couple who always looked tired but smiled. We thought he was hoarding, someone said, softly. But he was feeding our own neighbors. Across town, in a quiet corner of the tea shop, Mr. Harold Fischera, retired schoolteacher, sat with his walking cane, sipping slowly. He looked up as someone asked him, "Did you know Thomas well?" Mr. Fisher nodded slowly, blinking back tears. "About 3 winters ago, I asked him to fix my best suit. The only one I had left after my wife passed. I was going to wear it to her anniversary service, but I couldn't afford the repair. He told me, 'Don't worry, Mr. Fisher. I'll give you a discount today.'" Harold smiled bitterly. But when I went to collect it, the ticket just said £0. I thought it was a kind gesture. Now I know it was so much more. People around the tea shop listened in silence. One woman placed her hand gently on Harold's arm and whispered, "He did that for you too." Outside the pharmacy, young Ellie Parsons, no more than 23, stood with a heavy heart. Her eyes were red from crying. "I used to laugh at his shoes," she admitted. "Once, I called him stingy because he wore the same pair for years. I even said it to my friends outside his shop. He heard me." She paused. "He didn't say anything, just looked at me, with kind eyes, like he forgave me before I even realized I was wrong." She swallowed hard and continued. "A few months later, my dad got sick. We didn't have enough money for all his medicine. Then, suddenly someone paid. Every week, the balance was just gone." Ellie wiped her tears. "I only found out yesterday it was him." As the week passed, more people came forward. Mrs. Coleman, the librarian, recalled a time when her husband lost his job, and someone left a gift card in their letterbox with no name. The Walker twins shared that someone paid for their school shoes every autumn for 3 years. Even the town's mayor, Mr. Graves, shared with shame how he once refused to invite Thomas to a community dinner, thinking he wouldn't fit in. "He was better than all of us," Mr. Graves admitted in front of the town hall. "We just never looked close enough to see it." A small group of children, led by Henry Cartwright, painted a wooden sign and nailed it onto the front of Thomas's old shop. "Thomas Whitmore, the tailor who sewed hope into every thread." The town agreed it would stay there forever. People began leaving spools of thread, buttons, and tiny hand-sewn hearts on the doorstep. No one dared remove them. It became a place of memory and meaning. Belmar would never be the same again. But that change didn't come from a law or a leader. It came from one quiet man with a needle and an open heart. It began with a boy and a promise. Henry Cartwright, once a hopeful student struggling under the weight of poverty, stood by Thomas Whitmore's graveside, clutching a small Tom's journal. The same journal that had carried his name, dates, and notes about the envelopes that had arrived at the hardest moments of his young life. Now, Henry was no longer the boy in scuffed shoes and second-hand jackets. He was Dr. Henry Cartwright, a lecturer in social sciences at a university in Manchester, returned home not just to mourn, but to honor. Within weeks of Tom's funeral, Henry launched the Whitmore Opportunity Fund, a scholarship program for underprivileged students from Belmar and surrounding towns. The fund was announced in the local paper with just one line beneath it: "In memory of the man who stitched futures from scraps." Donations flooded in. Former recipients of Tom's anonymous kindness contributed what they could. Local businesses joined, inspired by the story that had touched every household. Parents cried as they filled out the forms, thinking of the man who once gave so much, asking nothing in return. The first scholarship was awarded to a girl named Sophie Reynolds, daughter of a single mother who once received hampers every December. Sophie wanted to be a nurse. Her acceptance letter to university came on the anniversary of Tom's passing. "I never knew who helped us," Sophie said in a televised interview. "Now I do. And I'll carry his name in my heart every day." The old tailor shop on Oak Ridge Lane didn't stay silent for long. For weeks after Tom's death, the windows were left untouched, as if Belmar collectively held its breath, uncertain what to do with the space that once bustled with quiet kindness. The bell above the door no longer jingled. The sign, Whitmore's Tailoring, began to fade. Until, one morning, Henry stood at its doorstep, holding a new wooden plaque. Whitmore's Place, a home for helping hands. The town came together with paintbrushes, tools, and energy not seen in years. The inside was renovated, but the wooden counter where Tom used to measure cloth remained untouched, a shrine to simplicity in service. They placed his sewing machine in the center, now encased in glass, surrounded by photographs of families, letters of gratitude, and pages from his diary. Whitmore's Place became a hub for hope. It offered free meals every evening, sewing lessons for the unemployed, and support groups for those silently struggling. It welcomed all just as Tom had, in his own quiet way. A mural on the back wall showed Tom with a needle and thread, stitching a torn map of Belmar, binding the town together, piece by piece. One of the most painful absences after Tom's death had been the sudden stop of the mysterious food hampers. They were from him all along. An elderly woman whispered at the memorial. "We thought it was a charity." Once the truth was known, it didn't take long for Belmar to act. A group of townsfolk, led by Albert and Joan Hiltha, very couple Tom had organized the first Whitmore Hampers Drive. Every first Saturday of the month, a group of volunteers packed boxes with staples, fresh fruit, and handmade cards with warm messages. Each box carried the same closing line. "With love, from someone who believes you matter." No name, no need for one, just as Tom would have wanted. Over time, what started as a tribute became a Belmar tradition. Children accompanied parents to pack boxes. Local farms donated produce. Bakers slipped in warm loaves. The act of anonymous giving became part of the town's DNA. The tailor who gave in secret had inspired a town to do the same. Near the center of Belmar Green, where sparrows sang in the hedges and laughter from the schoolyard echoed in the afternoons, a new bench appeared. Crafted from oak, sanded smooth by the hands of locals. The bench stood beneath a tall ash tree that Thomas often sat under during his lunch breaks. He used to watch the children play, sometimes with a sandwich in one hand and a sketchbook in the other, quietly observing the life he helped hold together. Etched into its backrest, in golden script, were the words, "Here sat Thomas Whitmore, rich in heart." People stopped often, some to sit, some to cry. Others brought flowers, or little notes of thanks pinned under the armrest. Children would ask, "Who was he?" And their parents would tell them about the tailor who was never truly poor, because he spent his life making others rich with hope. Thomas Whitmore never wanted a statue. He never sought applause. He didn't need it. What he did leave behind was far more a stinga thread of kindness, stitched so deeply into the fabric of Belmar, that even after he was gone, it held strong. Every hamper sent, every scholarship awarded, every smile in Whitmore's Place, every tear on that oak bench was part of his legacy. Not every rich man drives a Bentley or owns an estate. Some live in modest cottages, hem trousers with wrinkled hands, and walk home alone with a loaf of bread under their arm, saving pennies, not for themselves, but for others. Thomas Whitmore, the rich tailor of Belmar, was one such man, and Belmar, once blind to a saint among them, now carried his light forward, one silent act of kindness at a time. In a world that often mistakes luxury for success and loudness for influence, Thomas Whitmore reminded us of a quieter truth, that the richest souls are not the ones who hoard gold, but the ones who quietly give it away, piece by piece, in the form of love, time, and kindness. He didn't wear fine suits, though he could have stitched the finest in town. He never sought applause, though every act of his life deserved a standing ovation. He never had a family of his own, yet became a father figure to an entire community. Tom never lived to see his name in lights, never imagined murals painted or scholarship funds created in his honor. In fact, had he known, he might have shyly protested, asking them to instead give someone else a turn. But the truth stands, he was the richest man Belmar ever knew, not because of what he kept, but because of what he gave. And what he gave was never flashy. It was warm bread on a cold night, a rent paid quietly, a child's prom left at the doorstep, an envelope that arrived just in time. It was hope, wrapped in silence. For years, people passed Thomas on the street, eyes sliding past him as though he were invisible. Some called him stingy, others peculiar. He never bought new shoes. He reused envelopes. He declined every town celebration and rarely joined any crowd. What they didn't know was that he was choosing to live simply so others could live fully. That behind those threadbare clothes was a man whose soul was dressed in gold. Too often, we judge generosity by how loud it is. We imagine it as grand gestures on social media, or public checks handed out for photo ops. But real kindness often comes from those who say little, but do much. Tom Stitched lives in the quiet of his shop, with coins saved from skipped meals, and coins earned by hemming trousers late into the night. His generosity didn't need recognition, it needed only a need. Appearances lie, actions reveal. And in the end, the man many dismissed turned out to be the very heart of the town. When people think of heroism, they picture grand rescues, trumpet calls, medals. But Belmar's greatest hero was a tailor who crept down back alleys at night to leave groceries. A man who slipped envelopes under doors, who signed his letters only as a friend. Kindness, real kindness, doesn't shout, it whispers. It walks softly so no one feels embarrassed. It gives without waiting for thanks. It appears just when you've lost all hope, and disappears before you can say a word. Fault text. Tom's life was full of midnight kindness, of quiet prayers for strangers, of hands that mended more than fabric, they mended broken moments. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson. You don't have to be loud to change the world. You just have to love it enough to act, even when no one is watching. The people of Belmar changed because of Tom, not because he told them what to do, but because he showed them what was possible. He taught them that you can feed families without ever meeting them. You can protect dignity by giving anonymously. You can leave behind a legacy without ever building a monument. He taught them that true giving is not transactional, it's transformational. And so, Belmar continues his mission. Not by trying to be as good as Tom, but by remembering that they all have a little of Tom in them. Every child who shares their lunch, every shop owner who donates a coat, every teen who volunteers after school. Tom never expected anything in return. He gave because he cared. There's a final quote, now painted in gold across the wall inside Whitmore's place. The smallest thread, when woven with love, can hold a whole town together. That was Tom's legacy, not in wealth, not in fame, but in connection. In the invisible threads of compassion he wove through every street, every home, every heart. He reminded us that we all hold a needle, that we all can stitch hope into someone's life, and that the true measure of richness isn't in our bank accounts, but in the difference we make, silently, in the lives around us. So if you walk through Belmar today, sit a while on that bench beneath the ash tree. Let the wind tell you his story. And remember, true wealth wears no crown. It simply wears a smile. Golden words, the final threads of his story. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear needles, thread, and a quiet smile. He stitched broken hearts with unseen hands, and walked away before the world could thank him. In a town that slept, he stayed awake to ease someone's hunger, someone's sorrow. He left no children behind, but the whole town calls him father. When the world saw a poor old tailor, heaven saw a king. If you wish to honor him, be the reason someone believes kindness still exists. He never asked for applause, but now the whole town stands silently, gratefully.